Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And it's a delight to be with you. And what else would anyone want to do at 4:30 in the afternoon after having listened to people all day than hear another politician? I can tell you're all fired up about that. I would be too. It's raining outside, so you don't want to go outside anyway. But nevertheless, good to be with you, and like to strike up a question or two. Be sure and write something down. Where are you all from? Everybody from Ohio? Is that right or not? Anybody not from Ohio? Let's see these folks. Okay, good. My goodness. There's lots. Where are y'all from?
Jersey.
Jersey. Boy, you got an interesting governor. Yeah. Good. Kentucky. You got an excellent governor, don't you? Yeah. Who else?
South of Chicago.
South of Chicago. That's good. And by the way, for those that like politics, the counties are red and green, you know, just as an aside for the old timers, Republicans were always blue, forever and ever and ever. And in 1984, Reagan carried every place but Washington, D.C. Now, at the last minute, he lost Minnesota by 1,346 votes, as his campaign manager says, but I'm not bitter. But Reagan refused to go to Minnesota. He absolutely refused to go because he wanted the guy to carry his home state, but he almost didn't do it. Bottom line, so they were watching the evening news as all these states are coming in blue, 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 blue. And George Will said, and of course Washington, D.C. was red, he said, that's the way Reagan looks at America. It's red Washington against the rest of the country. And everybody laughed, and boom, at the next election, they switched the colors, and Republicans have been red ever since, because we always knew Democrats were red, but nevertheless. So you're from downstate of Illinois, which if you look at the counties, the entire state of Illinois is red, but you got blue Chicago. Pennsylvania, all red, but you got blue Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Michigan, same way. Got Detroit. So there's something going on as to why that is. So where else? Some more states. Where are you from? Yeah. Kansas, good. And you're from where? Missouri. Okay, good. We're going to carry all these good states? Minnesota. Hey, you see your senator on television last night? He was introduced. Okay. North Carolina. Everybody in the world should root for North Carolina. They are out. The left is out to destroy their governor. And they walked in his office and told him, we are going to make a spectacle out of you, and we will destroy you and therefore the rest of the country. So that's where they made their little regulation that you can't say you're a boy or a girl in the bathrooms. And North Carolina says, we don't think that's very smart. And so they decided to sue that state in cooperation with all the special interest groups that go with the left. And they've come down to destroy Pat McGrory to make a lesson to the rest of the politicians. But that's a little far down the line. We'll talk about that in about 20 or 30 minutes. Anybody else want to tell me where they're from? Pennsylvania. We'd like to carry Pennsylvania this year. That would be a good thing to do. The clicker, Adam, is it still with us? A little background. There's a little place on the world called America, 4% of the population of the world. Every year, those people write more books, more plays, more symphonies, more copyrights, more inventions than the rest of the world combined. For thousands of years, people would hope to someday fly. It was Americans that invented the airplane and the light bulb and the telegraph and the telephone and the global positioning system and the internet, put men on the moon, air conditioner. Half of all the people on earth live on less than $2 a day. Half of those live on less than $1 a day. That'd be a fourth. The second richest spot on earth is Western Europe, France, Germany, Britain. In America, we have a level below which we will not permit a person to sink. You come to this country, sit down on a park bench, gripe and complain about the country, we will bury you with stamps for food, a roof over your head, a bed to sleep in, unlimited health care, education, a person living in poverty in America. Rector study, Heritage Foundation, Wall Street Journal, done every 24 months for the last 37 years. A person living in poverty in America is more likely to have a telephone, a television, an air conditioner, an automobile, eats more meat, the higher the standard of living, the more protein you get, and has more square footage space than the average resident of the second richest spot on earth, Western Europe. Now the question would be, why? It's important that we know the answer to that question, because if we don't, we're liable to elect someone who wants to fundamentally change America, and then there'll be no place else for us to go. So it's really not that complicated. It's really quite easy. It's politics is made up of two things. Politics is easy as pie. Politics is made up of integrity plus economics. I don't care if you're voting for in Baghdad or Belgium or Buenos Aires or Boston, you only vote on two things. You vote on integrity and economics. So we'll say we have two dials. And conservatives and traditional Americans and our founders want to have very high integrity, a sense of right and wrong, and a very low burden of government, which is we're going to go through everything the government does. Instead of you, it takes freedom away from you. Either you make it or government makes it. So America wanted high integrity with low limited government. The Rand Paul, what would they call themselves? Libertarians. Libertarians want to have low integrity. That is, that they don't want, if they want to, gambling or drugs or prostitution or whatever, they don't want anybody to tell them. So they want low integrity, but low government burden. Whereas liberals want low integrity with high government. So how you turn those two knobs determines the wealth of any city or a state or a nation. And it's not that complicated, so we're going to walk through it. Politics easy as pie. First of all, integrity. Now, integrity was kind of a challenge to me because I grew up in a small town in rural Ohio, and when a person gave your word, you could count on it. And, you just expected that they would honor it. When I got to Congress, I discovered that people weren't that obligated to their word. And it wasn't that they actually didn't do anything illegal or immoral. It's just they didn't do anything at all. And so therefore, I had to come up with a definition of integrity. And I define integrity as made up of two things. Integrity is performing the task for which it was designed. That is, you say that this floor has integrity, or you say a bank has integrity. It does what it's supposed to do. And integrity is made up of two things. First of all, it's made up of morality. And I define morality as not doing what's wrong. Shalt not steal. Shalt not lie, bear false witness. You sign a contract, you're supposed to honor it. Shalt not murder, etc., etc. But integrity, if you count on them to be there, it's more than just not doing something. Edmund Burke, all that's necessary for tyranny to prosper, good men to do nothing. You sit on a couch all day and be moral. But integrity means more than that, is character. And I define character as doing what is right. So, your daughter comes home from school and says everybody was picking on Sally today and calling her fatty and all. But I didn't do it. That's good. You did not do anything wrong. But did you have the character to stand up and on her behalf and do what was right? Now, here's where the crux comes in. What is the definition of right? And everything flows from there. Is it warm enough in here for everybody? Would we violate a few international agreements if we open that door or something, you think, back there, Justin? Or I don't know about the rest of you, but the air conditioning went out. Well, all right. We need Mr. Carrier again. All right, good. So the final observation is, I remember when we had a president. He's going to speak tonight at the Democrat convention, by the way, and the governor of New York was being interviewed by Larry King. And he said about the president, he said, I would not trust him with my sister, but I know that in time of crisis, he'll do what is right for my country. No. If your family can't trust you, chances are nobody else can. But it was on his private time. Now, what he did in his private life, that doesn't matter. Now, can you imagine such a thing? You walk into a bank and you say to the president of the bank, your teller over there has been arrested 3 times in the last month for breaking and entering. Oh, I know. When he's not here at the bank, on his private time, he's just a real scoundrel, I'll tell you. No. Either you have character or you don't. And here's the concluding point, is you can be moral and have weak character. But you cannot do what is right if you're doing what's wrong. Now that sounds rather elementary, unless you're with the New York Times, and this would be a profundity. That is that you cannot do what is right. So you can be a moral person, but you cannot by definition. An immoral person lacks character. And so if we're going to vote for two things, we're going to vote for integrity, number one, and number two is economics. I'm now going to share with you 95% of all the economics you'll ever need to know the rest of your life. Here it is. Let us suppose that represents 100% of your income, 100% of the income of any city or state or nation. Let us say it represents a $100 bill. And you go into Walmart and the most expensive thing in the store is $95. You are completely free to choose anything in the store. Now, let us suppose that someone comes along and takes 25% of it away from you, leaves you with 75. What happens? Well, there are some things you can no longer choose. You've lost your choices, which is the definition of freedom. Thomas Jefferson said freedom is having choices. The more choices I take away from you, the less freedom you have. Anybody that's ever raised a teenager has had this debate. And also, the more money I take away from you, the lower your standard of living. I repeat, if you're not a Northeasterner and go to Ivy League college, this will make perfect sense to you. That is, if I take money away from you, you're worse off. But if you're a liberal, they don't catch that. But so the more I take away from you, suppose someone comes along and takes half of it. Even fewer choices, less freedom, lower standard of living. Suppose someone comes along and takes 75. It leaves you with 25, whatever, fewer choices. Suppose someone comes along and takes it all. What do we call a person who works all day, keeps absolutely nothing? That person is called a slave. Now, there are two people that can take money away from you. One is called a criminal. He has a gun and he can take money away from you. The other is called the government. Has a gun and can take money away from you. Here's the point. The impact is the same. You walk out from the pay window all across the parking lot, a fella comes up, puts a gun in your rib, says, I want 50% of everything you've earned. You go home, sit down with your wife and children, this is the kind of food we're going to have, this is the kind of vacations we can take, this is the kind of house we can buy, this is how much money we have to live. Or you make it all the way to your truck, you open a paycheck, Uncle Sam's already been here. It's already gone. The impact is the same. So, you want to know who to vote for? You show me what percentage of the gross domestic product, the GDP, the goods and services produced by any city, any state, or any nation. And the principle applies. The greater the freedom, the greater the wealth, the greater the government, the greater the poverty. And it only works this way every time. And now that you know that, you can become president of Nicaragua and make it one of the richest cities and one of the richest states in the country, in the world, if you want to. When I was in the state legislature in Columbus, Ohio was number one in new job creation. Number one. Over the next 25 years, we increased taxes regularly to when Kasich took office, we were 49th out of the 50 states in new job creation. 49th. For the first time in history, Ohio Buckeyes were saying, thank God for Michigan. But nevertheless, you can do this to anybody at any time. And this is all the battle is. We were, in the 1970s, the Democrats had run the government. We had, first of all, they can foul up a two-car funeral. They don't understand how you make things, and so they regulated the point that America, I was in the legislature when we voted on emergency legislation because Jimmy Carter had gone on television with his little sweater in front of the fireplace explaining that we were running out of natural gas. Now, this is before y'all were born, so let me just tell you. So we were all going to run out of gas next Tuesday a week, and so we had to pass emergency legislation because you had to keep grandma alive, and so you had to pass legislation to not allow natural gas to be used for anything purposes other than residential. Cut off all those businesses. We had 2,400 acres in Ohio under glass where we raised hot houses for vegetables and flowers. Wiped them out. Why? Because we didn't have time to convert to oil or to something else. Just bingo, an emergency legislation because we're all running out of natural gas. 11 of us voted against it, but because and back in those days, by the way, we have global cooling. We were all going to freeze to death. Ice Age was a commodity. Just when you're bored, Google the Ice Age and global cooling, and you'll see the cover Time and Newsweek, and you see where the Ice Age is coming down upon us, and how that they used to have armadillos in Minnesota and North Dakota, but now they're down in the South because the Earth is getting cooler, and we're all going to freeze. And then they went the other way. Now we're all going to burn up, and then they have these new devices. They're called thermometers, and you can measure whether or not, and since 1997 it's not gotten any hotter, so now they just say global, what a change, what is it called? Climate change. Yeah, climate change. Can't argue with that. Sure enough, climate's going to change. But you got to have. But in order for me to have control, I have to convince you that you're in some sort of a crisis. So we did that. By the way, natural gas. America's number one in natural gas, both in reserves and production. Our reserves are estimated 100 plus. Why do you say 100 plus? Because 100 years from now, you can't measure from anything. But we know that we have more than enough natural gas for at least another century. But in the 70s, under Jimmy, we learned to live with less, wear your sweater, ride your bicycle, and we had turned down your thermostat, turn off the air conditioning. We did that. And in the process of it, we're losing jobs, and they said that there's nothing you can do about it. That's the way it's going to be. The head of the Council of Economic Advisors in 1980, when Jimmy was running for re-election, this is the chief national cheerleader. He said, the question is not whether or not America will have a declining standard of living in the 1980s. The question is whether or not Americans can learn to adapt to their declining standard of living. And then in the Soviet Union, more countries went communist under Jimmy Carter than any president since Truman. So they formed an organization now known as the African Union, and they had a conference on African unity. They invited the leader of the world, the president of the Soviet Union, to come speak, and Leonid Brezhnev said this. He said, by the end of this decade, that's 1989, he said, we, the Soviet Union, will be able to work our will any place on the planet. The correlation of forces, economic, military, and political, are on the side of socialism and communism. In other words, everything was going to pot. And liberals said, that's just the way it is. Nothing you do about it. So they got a man who had majored in economics back in the 30s. He remembered when America could do things right. And he said, there's nothing wrong with America. Proper leadership can't cure it. And so we elect him. And what's the first thing they do? He cuts taxes. Now that means instead of having government spend money for you, which we'll discuss in a second, you're going to spend it for yourself. Save Investment Group began to create jobs. We created 3 out of every 4 jobs created on this planet were created in one country in the 1980s, the United States of America. The regulations on gas, they took all those regulations, threw them in the Potomac, killed the fish, freed the country. I was elected in November of 1980. And we drove back and forth between Washington and Hillsborough, Ohio. We drove back and forth 6 times between then and January when we took office. We knew there wasn't a single filling station in America open between Cincinnati and Washington after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. If you didn't have a full tank of gas by 3, we weren't going to make it home. When we came home in April, Easter, we're driving home, and we live in Hillsborough, which is on a hill. And we're driving up, and there at the intersection are 3 filling stations. Get there at 11:30 at night. My wife is asleep on the seat. I said, wake up, look at this. Boom. For the first time in 3 years, all the filling stations were lit. Why? Because market forces, regulations have been removed. We began to create oil and gas, and America began to right itself such that by the end of the decade, the 1989, the entire world was chanting USA, USA, USA. Now, leadership makes the difference. If you don't understand how this works, you can foul up anything. For example, so what's the principle? Greater the freedom, greater the wealth. So if you get elected to city council, county commissioner, anything, this is the principle that you apply. Now, what's the example? At the end of World War II, this place is called Nagasaki. And that's not a real good place, except that they got freedom at the end of the war. And this is what it looks like today. It looks a little bit better. Now, at the same time that looked like, this is 1953. They divided the Korean Peninsula at the 38th parallel. I like to use the example because I majored in economics. Anybody else do that? And so they like to tell you the reason that America's rich is because we have lots of natural resources, temperate climate, we're hard workers, any kind of bull they can come up with. I like to use this one because there's no, you can't blame it on the neighbors or anything. Same heritage, same culture, same climate, same everything. North Korea got socialism. South Korea got freedom. And over the last 5 years, 2.5 million people in North Korea have starved. That means they eat sticks and leaves just to fill up their stomach, have starved. They walk around bent over. First thing you do, food, clothing, shelter. First thing you do is food. They can't even do that. South Korea has the 10th largest GDP in the world. What's the difference? Temperate climate, natural resources. Nonsense. Freedom. Freedom creates wealth. At the same time that Korea, when it got its independence, it was 3rd from the bottom of all the nations on earth. It was the third poorest. There are no 60-year-old trees in South Korea. People took the bark off boiled broth just to stay alive. At the same time that South Korea was at the bottom, the richest city in the world was a place called Detroit, Michigan. Not close, by the way, by about 18% or a fifth. The richest place in the world was Detroit, Michigan. And in 1957, some folks said liberalism ought to be good for this. And so they've had Democrat control ever since. And this is what that city looks like today. There are more three-story single-family homes in Detroit than any place in the world. There are 48,000. This is was considered the most beautiful public building in the world. The murals in there, it was dedicated just 100 years ago this summer in Detroit as the railroad station. There's what it looks like under Democrat leadership. There are 48,000 single-family homes in Detroit. They're not uninhabited, or uninhabitable. And as a result, the population is such that it's now reached the level as it was in 1900. So if you understand this principle, you can make any rich place poor, or any poor place rich, just by simply taking away people's freedom, making making decisions on their behalf, which no one can do. No one can do. I love my wife. I can't buy clothes for her as well as she can buy them for herself. I mean, now you get somebody. What about somebody in the capital of Columbus buying them for her down in Cincinnati? How about somebody in Washington buying her outfits? You look like China, where everybody had the same blue outfits and the same. It's just the way it works. Now we know that's the way it works. Now let's know why, because a lot of politicians say that they're for lower taxes, but they can't tell you why, and they're for smaller government, but they can't tell you why. Well, let's tell you why. Let us suppose that you're going to buy something for yourself. And this is why free economies work and socialist governments do not. Let us suppose you're going to buy something for yourself. You care about two things. You care about the price because you're paying for it, and you care about the quality because you're going to consume it. And nobody can make that decision as well as you can. You might pay $4 for a cup of coffee at 7 in the morning for which you wouldn't pay 50 cents at 2:30 in the afternoon. If it's your money, spending it for yourself, you get the maximum benefit. Now, let's suppose that one of those things is not controlled by you. Let's suppose you're going to buy something for someone else. Do you care about the price? Yep, because you're paying for it. But you're a little more flexible on the quality. Green, she'll like it. You know, we've all bought things. We've all bought things for you know. By the time it breaks, they'll be married 4 years. They'll forget who gave it to them anyway. This will be fine. We've all bought things for people we never bought for ourselves. We've all received as gifts, which we wouldn't have bought for ourselves. We care about the price when we're paying for it. We're not as concerned about the quality. Now, let us suppose that you're going to consume it, and someone else is going to pay for it. Do you care about the quality? You betcha, but you're not so concerned about the price. So the waitress comes along and says, would you like to have some orange juice? And you say, well, how much is it? And she says, well, it's $3. No, really, I'm fine. No, oh, you got the pancakes. It comes with the pancakes. Oh, well, in that case, I'll take 3 glasses. You know, pour away. You know, you might leave half a glass. You wouldn't if you were paying for it. Do you care about the quality? Yes, because you're consuming it. You care about the price? Nope, because you're not paying for it. Any father that ever got roped into an open bar at a wedding understands this program. So, final example. Let us suppose that where you work, everybody that goes to work late has to give $5 in the kitty, and there's at the end of the day they raffle it off, or end of the month they raffle it off. So the boss comes in and says, "John, see how much money's in there, and we'll buy something for it." And so you count it out. There's $150. You say, all right. So you go to lunch, you're coming back, and you forget about it. And you think, "Oh my goodness, I forgot." And you look around, and there, in the store window, is a 6-foot-tall stuffed frog. And you go over and you check the price, $149. Oh, that's just great. You go over, you buy the frog, you take it over, shove it in the closet at the end of the day. The boss invites everybody down, lectures to them about being late. Everybody draws numbers, see who wins. Sally wins. What does she win? She bring out 6-foot-tall frog. Everybody laughs and claps. I think that's so funny. Go out and shove it into her car and cheers as she drives through the parking lot. What's that called? That is called a third-party purchase. A third-party purchase is purchasing something with money that's not yours, therefore you don't care about the price. To purchase something you're not going to personally consume, therefore you do not care about the quality. Now, if you ever had a public speaking course, they tell you that when you're going to say something profound, you're supposed to pause for emphasis. So I am now going to pause for emphasis. Because what I'm about to say is not Democrat, Republican, Christian Democrat, Socialist, Labor Party, Tory, and this is just the facts, Jack. By definition, all government purchases are third-party purchases made with money that's not theirs to purchase things they will not personally consume. Therefore, will there be waste in the highway department? You betcha. Will there be waste in the defense department? You can count on it. That's why we believe, as Abraham Lincoln said, that the government should only do those things which a man cannot do better for himself. Why? Because every time we take a dollar from an individual to save and invest and use to the maximum benefit of themselves and their family and run it through a third-party system called government, we're in the process of making the nation poorer. And you show me what percentage of the GDP of any city, any state, or any nation is controlled by government, and the principle applies. The greater the freedom, the greater the wealth, the greater the government, the greater the poverty. Now, you say, well, Bob, they explained to me that there are just some things the government can do that nobody else can do. Well, there's a handful of those, national defense, highways and things, but liberals always want to figure out how to do more things. Tell you what color to paint your front door and what size light bulbs you can use and how big a flush you can have in your toilet and just an infinite capacity to tell you what to do. And so one of them is about health care. The government should tell you how to do it. Now, whenever you see something fouled up in an economy, always look to government. They're the ones that can do it. See, I can't. They say, well, don't we need government to prevent a monopoly? No. You can only have a monopoly with government. Without government, you cannot have a monopoly. I can't make you buy a $10 hamburger. Because the second I set up a $10 hamburger, somebody's going to come right here and sell you a $2 hamburger. The only way I can sell you a $10 hamburger is I cut a deal with the city council that I'm the only one that can distribute hamburgers in the stadium. And I have the police at the door to go through your purse to make sure you don't bring any in there. And after about 4 or 5 hours, you'll come and pay me $10. That's the only way because I have a monopoly, and that only comes from, the rest assured, if in free markets you could have a monopoly, there never would have been a Wendy's or Colonel Sanders or McDonald's would have controlled it all. In order to have, so if you don't do that, then what else? When you see something haywire, well, we need government to interfere in something. What is it? Well, we need government in healthcare. Okay, why is that? When was the last time you heard somebody complain about the price of their home insurance? And I always say, if anybody ever did, what's the first thing you'd say to them if somebody complained about it? You say, well, try my guy. Or complain about their car insurance, or complain about their life insurance. But lots of people complain about the price of their health insurance. Why? Do we have good quality health insurance? You betcha, the best in the world. Minneapolis, little Rochester, Minnesota, is one of the finest airports in the world. People fly from all over the world. Why? Because the Mayo Clinic's there. We just had the Republican convention in Cleveland, the Cleveland Clinic. The Prime Minister of Canada. He didn't have to stand in line in Canada. Where does he come to get his heart bypass? Comes to Cleveland, comes to America. The finest healthcare in the world. The prices are all fouled up. Why? Look for government. And so, in 1941, December 7th, America is attacked at Pearl Harbor. And over the next few months, 6 million men immediately sign up. They go to war, risking their lives and limbs. Politicians, God love them, they're always going to have to do something good. And so they said, well, if they're going to sacrifice, we at home should sacrifice. And so they pass a law saying a wage and price freeze. Nobody can have a wage increase or a price increase during the war. We're all going to sacrifice together. Well, it's fouled up immediately. McDonnell Douglas and his engineers from Illinois. And how they're going to get them to get there if they don't pay more. And so the whole thing begins. So the organized labor goes into FDR and said, whoa, we can't get a pay raise for them, and we're taking money out of their paycheck every week. That doesn't, if we can do it, we can't do anything for them. They're going to be mad at us, and they get mad at us. That ain't good for you either. So being a liberal means never having to say you're sorry. So rather than back out and fix it, here's what they did. You can look it up. It's Executive Order, I think it's about 9320 or something, but anyway, it has to do with the exemption for health care. So they decided that FDR said, well, if you unions will negotiate to have the employer pay for your car insurance, pay for your life insurance. No, that wouldn't be good. Pay for your mortgage. No, pay for your health insurance. That's it. Negotiate to pay for your health insurance. They'll save the money. We'll give the tax cut, the deduction to the business, and they'll be better off financially. We won't count it as a pay raise. And so in 1942, 5% of the people in America had someone else purchasing their health care. By 1945, 85% of the people had someone else purchasing their health care. Do they care about the quality? You betcha. Care about the price? Not a whit. So the doctor comes up and says, I want to have these 10 tests done. How often do you look at the doctor and say, well, how much are they? The doctor would look at you like a cow looking at a new gate. Well, I don't know how much they cost. Besides, you're not paying for them anyway. So once the individual's not paying for it, there's all kinds of distortions. So even in the same city, you have prices all over the market, but there's no information, there's no competition, there's no free enterprise. And so you have this aberration. Now when that happens, it's what once government comes in and fouls something up, they never want to back up. They say, we can foul it up further. And so here's the option. So here it is. Here's the situation. You have two options. How about if you do away with the mandate and you let 320 million Americans go out tomorrow to buy health insurance in every insurance company in the world. I'll say a little more coverage for a little less cost. That little gecko, he'll be selling you a little bit more health insurance, and they'll all compete. This thing could write itself in 24 hours. Or, here's a good one. How about if we have those good, compassionate folks down at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles? You know, the ones where they say, take a number and sit here for a week? Why don't we have them? Social Security people, they keep track of things so well. Why don't we have them take over the healthcare system? And those are the two options. Now, you understand how it works. You understand the economy. Here is October 2010. Your hero and mine. October. It says, those on the left believe that the only way to fix the system is through a single-payer system like Canada's. Now, the idea that you have no say at all, no choice at all, no nothing, just the government's going to tell you what you get and when you get, that is so exciting that the Democrats stand on their chair and clap and throw their hats and carry on. He waits for them to quiet down. And he says, where we would severely restrict the private insurance, what happens to loss of freedom? When government does anything, you lose your choices. We would restrict the private insurance market and have the government provide coverage for everybody. Applause, 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 applause. Unless you think he doesn't know what he's talking about, look at the next sentence. The very next sentence is this. On the right are those who argue that we should end employer-based systems, you bet your bottom dollar, and leave individuals to buy health insurance on their own, poor little snowflakes. And there is the choice. And at this point is where, if we had some conservative congressmen that understood they should be standing on their chair clapping and cheering, but they didn't catch it either. So that's where you are at an advantage. All right, but that's the basis. How is wealth created? We'll go back. I don't want to bore you guys to death. I really feel very sympathetic to your condition. And if I were in your, I'd be throwing stuff at this point. But you need to know how wealth is created, and most people don't. And I'll just give you as a rule of thumb. When I speak at colleges, this is what I start out with. How does a person become wealthy? And of course, the left. Well, the rich and the powerful and white advantage and Wall Street. And I understand all that. But tell me, how do you create wealth? And after I let them do that for about 8 or 10 minutes, and I say, all right, fine, you don't have a clue. Therefore, I'm going to tell you. And then we have an advantage. How is wealth created? Wealth is created when there's a person driving down the street out here. There's only 2 ways that I can get money out of that person's car. Only 2. One is called free enterprise. That's where I lay awake nights figuring out ways to do something good for the person, such that they slam on the brakes, pull in and say, you're going to clean my car, make it all nice and clean, wash the windows and sweep out the drain. Well, I'd much rather have that happen and have this $10 bill. I'd much rather have those shoes and have this $50. A global positioning, I'll never get lost again. That's great. I'd much rather have that and have this $200. Under free enterprise, people figure out ways to do something good for the person such that they make an exchange, which at the end of the exchange, they are both better off. They are both wealthier than they were before. They have created wealth. And that's the only way wealth is created. Let's hit it again. You got a farmer, he's got a pile of wheat. You got a baker, he's got 10 empty ovens. The baker says, if I had his wheat, I could make donuts in the morning, I could sell them and make money. The farmer says, I don't need all this wheat. If I had his money, I could put a new roof over to buy a new tractor. And so the two of them come together and they make an exchange, which at the end of the exchange, they are both better off. And if they're not, they won't do it. They will both be wealthier at the end. And as they have created wealth, they're wealthier than they were. Now they can hire people to help them. So the farmer says, boy, with that, I can hire this guy and I'll get another 100 acres. And when I do another 100 acres, then I'll have even more wheat. And by creating wealth, which is essential to create jobs. I said there were two ways to get money out of that car. The other one is called coercion. Coercion is, lady comes up, stops at the street light, fella comes up, puts a gun in the window, and says, I want 50% of everything in your purse. Now, 3 questions. When she does that, has anyone created any wealth? Has any wealth been created? No. Has wealth been redistributed? Yes, from her to you. But since no wealth was created, can a criminal create a job? No. He could redistribute a job, but he can't create a job because there's no new wealth created. Let's don't call him a criminal. Let's call him a councilman. And the councilman says, if you are stupid enough to drive through the city of Detroit, I'm going to steal everything that you got. And so, has he created any wealth? No. Has he redistributed wealth? Yes. What happens when people know that every time I go to the intersection, that guy takes half my money? You start avoiding the intersection. So Detroit, now smaller than it was in 1900, all the empty homes. This isn't complicated. Anybody short of a Democrat can figure this stuff out. If you listen, if you listen to them tonight, all they'll talk about is redistributing wealth. The way wealth is distributed in this country. If you get in Interstate 70 out here and start driving west, it will go through Missouri, St. Louis. It goes through Iowa. And you go through Iowa and you look around and you say, look at all this corn. Mile after mile, corn. Then you get to Nebraska, and you see mile after mile, you got wheat. Now, if you're a liberal, you can get to Denver and say, isn't it terrible the way corn is distributed in this country? It's just terrible the way wheat is distributed in this country. Here we are in Colorado, and there's no wheat. All the wheat is in Nebraska. It's just terrible the way the wheat is bozo. Wheat is not distributed, it's grown, it's created. Wealth is not distributed. You'll hear it if you watch tonight, and you have to do stuff tonight? You probably won't watch the debate, don't you? I mean, watch the convention. Hey. All right. Well, anyway, you watch the short. They'll always talk about wealth distribution because they don't have a clue how to create wealth. And subsequently, they attack the people that produce it. Therefore, they escape, which has been a real blessing to America, by the way, because idiot countries all over the world have done that. That as they've chased productive, successful people that have come to America to escape. Now, we're doing exactly the same thing to them, and they're going to Estonia and elsewhere in these places for the first time in history. Why? But it can be fixed overnight. There's nothing wrong with it. All we have to do is just make sure that we elect the right folks. Now, next we continue on here. That was where, do you want to, what you were asking, what you were talking before about the philosophy of the whole thing as to the first part and the second part. Let me just give you 10 minutes on the integrity and the moral parts of our system, because freedom economically is not sufficient. If you're in the Congo, because there's no spiritual value system of right and wrong, you have to have an army to protect your factories. You have to have military escorts as you take them to the port. They'll be stolen while they're at the port because with the lack of a Christian value system, you have poverty. And you can see it in the inner city, you can see it elsewhere. Wherever you have to have both. That's where our dear libertarian friends, they miss out. They don't understand that eventually you run out of other people's morality. You have to, and so when they're living in America, the most spiritual nation in the world, then they can say, well, I don't care, if I want to sleep with my daughter and sell dope or whatever, that's none of your business. Well, that's cute up until the fact that once you find out that the culture collapses, there can be no free enterprise system, so you have to have both. So what is the first part? Every barroom brawl, every schoolyard scuffle boils down to two words, and that is who says. And there has to be a starting point. And Thomas Jefferson said, on all disquisition, every philosopher has said that, certain primary truths or first principles, you have to have a starting point upon which all subsequent reasons must depend. Now, there's only two places that they start. Every philosophical debate, you can take any philosophy book, you go to any bookstore, any library, by page 5, either you believe one of two things. There's only two worldviews. Only two. Either you believe that man created God, or you believe that God created man. And from that, everything else flows. If you believe that man created God, then you believe that man has his own standard. Of course he does. If you believe that God created man, then you believe that God has a standard. If you believe that man is his own standard, you believe man is basically good. By what standard would he not be good? If you recognize that God has a standard, then you recognize that man falls short. If man is basically good, then anything that goes wrong is not his fault. It has to be the fault of his environment. So this guy's going around impregnating 8 or 10 different mothers, taking no responsibility for it. It can't be his fault. He's good. So it's good they didn't pass out enough condoms in the classroom. It's government program. Somebody comes in and starts shooting people. You can figure this out in a minute. Somebody starts shooting people. Well, it can't be his fault. He's good. So whose fault is it? Well, it's got to be that gun's fault. That gun coming in here doing those bad things. You got to regulate those guns. My goodness, you turn your back on them. If guns kill people, how does anyone get out of a gun show alive? I was wondering about that. Nevertheless, or if you believe that God has a standard, then you believe that man is responsible for his own behavior. And, of course, here's the most important thing. Without God, where do rights come from? They will always come from the group. And you can listen to a politician for 90 seconds, and you can tell where they stand. Because they'll always talk about women's rights and gay rights and Hispanic rights and African American rights, and there are no blonde left-handed rights. There's only rights that come from God. And that's the difference, by the way, the difference between a republic and a democracy. Now, we say we're a democracy because we democratically elect people to do what? To run the republic for which it stands. What kind of government have you given us, Dr. Franklin? A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. The word democracy does not appear in any of our founding documents because in a democracy, and we won't confuse other folks that don't understand all this, but because they think they use democracy in a generic term, but in a democracy, rights come from the majority. And Democrats believe that. Our daughter just returned from a year and a half from Rwanda. 80% of the people in Rwanda are Hutu, 20% are Tutsi. 80% voted to kill the 20%, and over the course of 90 days with machetes, they chopped 1 million people into pieces. In America, we can vote 95-5 to kill Jews. Can't do it. We're not a democracy. Our rights don't come from the democracy. Our rights don't come from the majority. Our rights come from God. Now, how does this play out into public policy? Well, these people will always want more government because the only solution to every problem that they create, man without God always ends up killing, and so they're going to have more and more government. These people want limited government. These people always want more tax. How do you get more government? More taxes. So these folks, I don't care if they're running for city school board, city council, governor, they will always want to have under this, I'm opposed to taxes, but at this critical moment, at this severe moment, at this very present time, I have to make the exception, and I will want more taxes every single time that they run, by the way. They've kind of picked out that it's really not smart. You all wouldn't remember this, but Bill Clinton was smart enough that he never gave a speech. I was running at the same time he was, and we encountered each other all the time. He never opened his mouth, But what he didn't say, how he was for cutting taxes, for cutting taxes. He wanted a middle-class tax cut. He wanted to cut taxes for all Americans. He said it over and over and over and over. And anybody had that much insight knew that he was lying. But nevertheless, when he got elected, didn't even wait till he took office. About the second week of December, he had his big press conference, came out, bit his lip. Quote, you can saw it on YouTube. He said, I've never worked on anything so hard in my life, but he's just going to have to propose the largest tax increase in the history of mankind. So it just, they will always do it. Now don't fall for it when they say that they're not, because they will always do it. That's what they do for a living. These people will want fewer taxes. These people always want a weak defense. These people want a strong defense. Now, this always gives Katie Couric heartburn, because she says, you people claim you want limited government, fewer taxes, but you always vote for a strong defense. The answer to that is yes. You're exactly right, ma'am. Because limited government protects our freedom. Fewer taxes protects our freedom. A strong defense protects our freedom. And that is what government is supposed to do. And the final example is these people will define marriage as between 3 men and a horse. And then, because they're the standard, they can make it a hate crime for you to do what you just did. To laugh at their definition of marriage. And there's a term for that. It's called tyranny. And it's exactly what they're engaged in. How many of you remember the story of the emperor who had no clothes? Have you ever heard that? It was by Hans Christian Andersen in the 1800s. Let me give it for those that didn't. That this tailor wanted to make an outfit for the emperor, and he wanted to be better than his competitors. And he said, only the wise and intelligent people can see this. And so the really smart people can see it. And so he presented it, and the king's not going to say, well, I don't see it, because he was dumb. So he asked his counselors, what do you think? Oh, it looks great, Your Honor. Oh, Your Majesty, that's just really terrific. He said, all right, well, good. So he buys it, and he's walking down the street, and a little boy says, why is the king marching in his underwear? And all of us think, oh, that's an interesting story, but that's too absurd for words. I mean, nobody would actually do that. I mean, that's stupid. Google, college kids say the darndest things. College kids say the darndest things. Where this guy goes to the University of Washington, and he takes 8 people coming out of the building. And he says, if I'm a woman, can I be a woman? And I'll say, oh, yes. If you feel like you're a woman, then you can be a woman.
He'll be here Saturday to speak.
Really?
Yeah, Joseph.
All right. Well, I hate to steal his story. It's interesting. I saw it on YouTube flying out to an event in Dallas, Texas. I walk in, I sit down at the table, and I'm so impressed by the whole thing. I mention it, and he's sitting right beside me. So this guy, he asked him, he says, can I be a woman? And then they all, absolutely, yes, sir. If you feel like you're a woman, you can be a woman. So he said, well, if I feel like I'm a Chinese woman, can I be a Chinese woman? I said, well, yeah, it's okay, you can be a Chinese. He's 5'9". So he said, well, if I feel like I'm 6'5", can I be 6'5"? And they all agreed. These college students, intelligent, capable Americans, said that this 5'9" white male could be a 6'5" Chinese female. Without exception. Chapter 1 of Romans. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. When you do away with God, you will end up all over the lot. There has to be a starting point, and our founders were not ambivalent as to which starting point to use. That's why there's this, and they chose God. Let me explain. Let me see what's next on here. This might be pretty good. Here it is. These guys came up with this. We hold these truths. Now, what is truth? I can say this room is 28 feet wide. You can say it's 29, you can say it's 32, you can say it's 19. And we can just be happy as clams until somebody comes and measures it. And when they measure it, that measurement is truth. And everything else is just opinion. God is truth. And everything else is just opinion. But here's what truth does. Truth reveals error. Error hates truth. So error will do everything possible to prevent the presentation of truth. There's nothing you can do about it. Truth reveals error. Now, in the world, let's suppose you're defending, you're prosecuting a client that has stolen an ATM machine, and you're in the courthouse. And the defense counsel said, oh, no, he wouldn't do such a thing while he was out in Portland, Oregon, having dinner with his sister. And here's the receipt that he had from having. You don't care what she says. She can say anything she wants because you're going to present a video of him driving up there. And then you'll see his face as he leans over, the picture of his face as he leans over the ATM machine, his fingerprints as he pushes the button. And then as he yanks it out of there, and the truth will overcome the error such that the only hope that she has, she has to prevent the presentation of truth. Because if truth gets entered into the court, she's dead meat. So she will object in every single way possible. That's why only liberals burn books throughout all of history. That's why liberals chant down speakers. When was the last time the Young Republicans Club went out and heckled people all day long? Liberals do it all the time. Why? We don't fear what they say. It doesn't make any sense. It's nonsense. It falls apart on its own. But they cannot tolerate. Let's take Fox News. ABC, CBS, PBS, everybody else, every liberal you can think of is presented on Fox News just as well. But Fox News also has conservatives. And truth overcomes error. Therefore, they complain not about anybody else. They complain only about Fox. The president can barely wake up in the morning without attacking Fox News. Why? They have every liberal that they want. They had every leader. I watched it all day long. They had every Democrat leader in Philadelphia was on Fox News. But when you have someone present truth, it overcomes the error. Therefore, they have to prevent the presentation of truth, which means that America is involved in a spiritual battle. And that's why you can talk, I could pray in the name of anything in the world, eagle feathers and Mother Earth and all that, but if I pray in the name of Jesus Christ, all hell will break loose. Why? Because he's truth. And our founders were not ambivalent on the topic. We hold these truths to be self-evident, which is a gracious Jeffersonian way of saying, any idiot ought to understand this. I mean, you could be blind, deaf, and dumb, bozo. This is self-evident, bozo. You ought to be able to see this, that all men are created. They didn't just crawl out of their primordial slime and say, let's write a symphony. They were created equal and were endowed by a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court. Rights come from only two places. Only two places. From the mob, from the group. I repeat, you listen to those people in Philadelphia, nobody's an American. Everybody's a gay or Hispanic or this or that. But we believe that all men are by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life. You say, oh, well, no. I don't want government involved in the bedroom. This is between a woman and her doctor, and I don't think government. You're in the wrong country, honey, because it says right there in our birth certificate that this is what to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The purpose of the American government is to preserve life. Then liberty, notice the sequence, liberty is of precious little value if you're dead. You have to have life first, life, then liberty, then sewer systems and overpasses. But the first thing you do is life. And so they ask Barack Obama, well, this is above my pay grade. No, if you're a dog catcher in America, the purpose of the American government is to preserve life and liberty. I've overstayed my welcome. I think we should proceed on at this point. I'll take a question or two. It's great to be with you. You guys should understand this is a battle that you're engaged in all the time. It always has been. When I was in college, George McGovern was run against Richard Nixon, and everybody was for McGovern. And it's just always been the idea that stealing from other people and giving it to other folks as being noble. That always sounds good to young people. And so a lot of people that you'll be around will follow that. And sad part is it creates chaos and poverty in its wake. And so when somebody comes in like Bernie Sanders and says, I'm going to give you something, you have to ask. Government doesn't have anything that it hasn't first taken from someone who worked. So when Hillary stands, I'm going to give you this and give you that, where are you going to get it? See those remaining people, these last few folks who are still working? We're going to take it from them. And when you do that, that discourages production, creativity, and job, all that goes with it. So wherever they go, now that you know this, I can blindfold you. And I can drop you down in Tegucigalpa or Buenos Aires or Cairo, and you can drive around and get back on the airplane an hour later, and you can just by looking at the condition of the people in the country, you can put them on that chart. Or you can drive north on Route 23 up through Columbus, and you can find it suddenly, or Detroit is a perfect example, suddenly the road falls apart and everything, and suddenly everything's nice. You think, well, something must have changed. I was parking in Washington, D.C. I was going to these people's house, and I was parking. And I dropped them off, the house was nice, and I got around the block, and the road falls apart and everything. And I thought, goodness me, what has happened? And I looked up on the post there, and it says D.C. All right, so now I'm in District of Columbia. So that means that I'm going to have higher taxes, lower standard of living, chaos, less freedom, all the rest. Just over there is a decent city. Now that you understand how this works, it will always be that way, and folks will always want to take things from other folks and give it and think that it's noble. So we've had a recent governor nearby say that it's, what would Jesus do? Well, he wouldn't come stick a gun in people's rib and steal their clothes. He wouldn't do that. I know that you think that, but that's not the case. There are 3 institutions in Scripture. There's the family, there's the church, and there's government. 271 times, Scriptures instruct us to help the poor. 2/3 of the time, it talks about you and me. 1/3 of the time, it talks about the church. And I tell these politicians, I don't need a book. I don't need a chapter. Give me one verse any place where God ever called upon a politician to use the police power of the state to steal from one person and give it to another and say, aren't I noble? You show it to me, I'm on board. But it's not there.
About 10 minutes for questions?
Well, sure. But nobody in their right mind wants to listen anymore. Okay, we'll go back there and go to here. You're first, go ahead.
So as someone who's interested in finding long-term public policy fixes, so to speak, thinking about the healthcare situation specifically, how do we reverse the last 75 years? And
good question. Easy as pie. Simple done. It's just marketplaces only work every time. In 1888, Grover Cleveland created the Interstate Commerce Commission. Now, this is going to startle you, but the Interstate Commerce Commission controlled every package that was sent in interstate commerce. All packages, all oil, all gas, all mail, everything. And when Reagan came in, he was going to get rid of a bunch of stuff, and so we went at it, and now we lost. Half of my freshman class was defeated in 1982. Reaganomics, everybody hated Reagan, and we're hanging him in effigy and carrying on, and we didn't make much headway. He planted the seeds economically that then just prospered like a son of a gun 2 or 3 years later. But we weren't able to do the things to the bureaucracy that we wanted to do. But the only thing we were able to do, Reagan used to say, the closest thing to eternal life on this earth is a government program. So we killed the Interstate Commerce Commission. And you can't imagine such howling. The ICC controlled the price of bus tickets, just everything. And we said, let the market, you should have seen the gnashing of teeth and the walling and clutching their heart and stamping around in the well of the house. People thought the world was going to come to an end. It righted itself overnight. Suddenly, places just like this, put up big boards. And and truckers at that point, you had to get a contract to transfer one thing to another. And when you did it, you're all done, you had to go back. So half of the trucks on the highway were empty because they're going back to where they came from. And now, when the government got out of it and said, no, we're not going to tell you what to haul, these little places appeared, and truckers would then drive over there in Chicago, Indianapolis, Louisville, or any place, and people would come in and say, I have one roll of steel that I want to go to Kennecott, Iowa. And these guys would bid on it, and it's estimated that anywhere from 1% to 3% of the GDP of this nation, I'll just give you a concept of that, we've never had 3% GDP growth since Barack and company came to town. So just from this much alone, because we went to 7 and 8% under Reagan, an estimated 1% to 3% GDP in the 1980s is credited just by getting rid of the ICC, where the competition began to enter the marketplace. It can fix it overnight. In healthcare, just stop and think of this. Let us suppose that FDR had decided we're going to let the bosses purchase their mortgages, and they're going to pay for their houses. Here we would be 70 years later saying, isn't it terrible? A guy loses his job, he loses his house. You say, yeah, dumb as a post. That's really idiot. But now we do the same. Isn't it terrible? You lose your job, you lose your health insurance. Yeah, that's stupid. Quit that nonsense. And then the left would come along and say, well, we need to tax those. Some people have big houses and some have little houses. And some people have Cadillac health plans and other health. He said, no, we don't need you at all. Just get out of it. So how do we solve it? We just turn it over to the marketplace, and it would right itself overnight. Yeah. Well, that's always a possibility. I don't think we have people in the Army that would do that. They're a citizen Army. I don't think we need to fear it, number one. And number two is, if you look at all the calculations that the Japanese made about an invasion into America, and they said, behind every leaf is a man with a gun. And so that would be a real chore for the Army to try to pull a stunt like that. But just in case, keep your guns. But yeah. Well, you do it by taxes. You just don't get carried away. As a percentage of the GDP. Let me just tell you what I did again. It was 2 days after I was in Ukraine. I was with some friends in Macedonia. And in Macedonia, all of these guys who were in their 20s, they decided they formed a little political party and they're going to run for the parliament. The oldest was 30, and he became the finance minister, and they decided they're going to have a flat tax. That is, where if you work harder and earn more, we're not going to punish you for doing that. We're going to take the same percentage as the days that you slept in. So immediately the IMF, the experts with all their PhD economics came down and said, oh no, you're going to destroy the country, people aren't going to pay, and all this sort of stuff. They estimated that the revenues would collapse 50%. They said, no, you won't. When we lower the taxes are going to take off. So they predicted an increase in spending. Not only did the increase in spending, it was 20% higher than what they predicted. And over the next 4 years, it was 20% higher than that. And the prime minister, the finance minister is now the prime minister. He's 38 or so now. And he said, Bob, he said, you can't spend money that fast. He said, when the money's coming in like that, he said, we kept cutting the tax, lowering down, but money was coming in so fast. If you were trying to build a bridge or a dam, you got to design the thing. You can't spend the money that fast. Until today, one country has to be the best place in the world, so they show me the OECD, the European Union, all these folks, that they have Macedonia as the #1 place in the world to do business. Now you could stop that in a minute. You take the city council from Detroit and you could drop them to the bottom. So it just the way that it works. So as long as the government's doing what it's supposed to do, maintaining peace and stability, then that's fine. But at the point that it's going to tell you what kind of light bulbs you have and what kind of toilets to flush, it is long left its responsibilities. Yeah. Well, our chart here is that the government is supposed to do that. Richard Nixon was the first president in history to spend less than half of the budget on defense. Always before it was 80 to 85% for defense, because that's what the government could do. Helping the poor is what you and I can do. The further you remove that, till finally people in Washington don't have a clue. So the idea that government should do what it does well and as little as possible. It defends our country well. That's why Barack Obama is in the process of destroying the military. Just as a quick aside, in actual numbers, he left $1.5 1.5 million pieces of equipment in Iraq. That's why you see the ISIS driving the M1 tank, the finest tank in the world. You go to any, on the way home to your states, drive by any armory and go look in the window. The armories of America are all empty because all the equipment is left over there. So nobody wants to join because the rules of engagement are you can't fire until after they've killed your buddy. So as a result, the number of people today at this moment that are in the United States Army is smaller than any time since before December 1941, when America had the 17th largest army in the world, smaller than Romania. So we've destroyed the Army. The Navy, which was 600 ships under Reagan, the Navy is now smaller than it was under Teddy Roosevelt, which was before World War I. And people say, well, with technology, the shipping lanes have not diminished an inch under Barack Obama. We've abandoned the two-ship Navy, and so that we have no impact. So Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which are up in the Baltics, just right across from Sweden and Finland, are scared to death that Russia's going to come and get them, as they've done it before. And so the military prevailed upon Obama to let our fleet make a showing in the area, just to say, we're still your friend. You're members of NATO and we're your buddies. And when he did that, Putin came back and dive-bombed the American military, the American ships. That's never happened in history. And so they see not the U.S. Navy as a source of protection. They say that paper tiger can't even defend itself, let alone us. That's the Navy. The Air Force at this moment is smaller than the day it was created. So anyone who says that we're overdoing it in defense is mistaken in my book. And the degree to which federal government takes away state responsibilities and state take away local responsibility is to which there is massive fraud and waste in the welfare department, in my judgment. Yeah. It's the marketplace, and people vote in the marketplace. And they choose what kind of things that they want, and what kind of mattresses they want, and what kind of houses they want to buy, and what kind of politicians they want to elect. And it's up to you and me to present politicians that they want. And I would encourage you to do that. So if you think about running, do it. Do it then. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the biggest one.
Never. Never. And I remember I was having dinner one time. There was a congressman from Cincinnati that was always in the middle of the road. And every special interest group would buy all these ads and tell him, write your congressman to vote this way and do that way. You know? And so I was with one of them, and this is just a few years ago. I said, why did you guys never do that to me? And they said, oh, Bob, everybody knew where you were. So, you know, like I say, the only thing you find in the middle of the road are yellow lines and dead animals. So you just, you know, if you want to hang out there, then everybody's going to be, but nobody ever did. Yeah. That's a very good question. What happened, I have a little accountability group. There's 5 of us. One of them is Ed Meese, who was chief of staff to Reagan in California, and then his counselor to the president when he was president, his closest friend. And we meet every Tuesday morning at 7:30. And one of them was the Sherpa, the Assistant Secretary of State for Economic Affairs that did all the G20 meetings for George Bush Sr. And he is really much more liberal than I am. I mean, he's a Bushy. And he was saying something to me the other day. He said, Bob, you know, free trade is good, but free trade that hollows out every small town in America is too much. And he said, immigration is good, but immigration that overwhelms all of your social programs to the point that your culture collapses and people can't even speak your language or know your country is too much. And your question about cronyism is, in this free trade agreement with the most recent one that passed, the one with the European Union, one of the provisions was that there are only 5 grain elevators. You know what a grain elevator is? You know what I'm talking about, where farmers store. There are only 5 grain companies that can sell to the European Union under that agreement. Archer's Daniel Midland, big financier Bob Dole, the Cargill, etc. So with that, with the smaller ones in southern Ohio, they then had to sell out to the big ones because they had access under that. That's not free trade. It was called a free trade agreement, but it wasn't. And one more example. The TPP that people are now, the Trans-Pacific Partnership in the Pacific is, I don't know, 3.5 feet thick. No one is allowed to see it. A member of Congress is allowed to read it but not take notes. Now you got to stop and think about that. First of all, the idea that we have congressmen that put up with that just makes my blood boil. But the agreement is such that they are not allowed to discuss it. And they don't. Why? Because there's stuff in there that people don't, is not free trade. So these pendulums come along. Richard Nixon, just to give it an aside, from the time that I was born until the time I was in the second term in the state legislature, that is a long time. There are only 4 people on a nationwide ticket, 2 for president, 2 for vice president. He was one of those 4 every time for that whole period, from 1948 to 1976. He studied the presidency and he said this. He said, the presidency seeks the man, or woman, so we'll pay attention here. That is that with Harry Truman, who was just nominated this week in Philadelphia, with Harry Truman trying to fill in for FDR, everybody felt he was in over his head. Just poor Harry didn't quite make it. And so they wanted a guy, a 5-star general that conquered Europe and all that, so they brought in Eisenhower. Eisenhower then was the oldest president we ever had in history. So here came along a guy who had never passed a bill, never done anything, but they were going to have a baby. And so we go with the Kennedy, and as the pendulum swings. Until 8 years later, our cities are burning to the ground. We're involved in a war which we don't know how to win. A flag is being burned all over America. People said, I don't care about Nixon. He may not be the greatest guy in the world, but bring him in, he knows what he's doing. So then they bring him in. And after 8 years, then you have Watergate and the chaos. And in 1976, I don't know too much history here, but in 1976, Hubert Humphrey, who had been vice president, Birch Bayh, senator from Indiana, who had 3 constitutional amendments passed, nobody in history had ever done that. Scoop Jackson, who was Kennedy's friend and chairman of the Armed Services Committee and considered the foremost military expert in America. Scoop Jackson, the U.S. senator from Washington. The senator from Oklahoma who was chairman of the Democrat Committee. All these people are running, quality people. Ed Muskie, who became Secretary of State and ran as vice president with Humphrey. All these guys, and they got beat by a guy who said, I don't know nothing about Washington. All I know is I raise peanuts, and you people in Washington don't know what you're doing. And quote, here's what Jimmy said, I want a government as good as American people. And he'd get up, he wouldn't talk about anything. He said, I just want a government as good. And people said, see, Nixon and Ford and those guys, they are corrupt. We want somebody who's couldn't find Washington on a map. Let's do it. And so they put Jimmy in. And Jimmy, then we fall off and say, Reagan, he's going to blow up the world, but he knows what he's doing. And so the thing just goes. Now, the fact is, the people no longer trust the people in Washington. And they say, well, we're going to have a free trade agreement and we're going to protect American industry. And people say, I don't trust you guys. I think you're all a pack of liars. And see that guy up there? I watched him fire people on television. I think he ought to go down and fire a bunch of you. And there you are. And so grab your seatbelt because it's coming. So, no. Everybody should be treated equally. Period. End of discussion. And Democrats look at people by groups. As long as blacks couldn't vote, they didn't give a whit about them. And once Dwight Eisenhower sent troops into the South and broke that thing apart, and the South began to come apart and began to grow and prosper, then they turned to him and they had this great affection. Then they turn and they want to blame us for what they did. They talk Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks, that was the National City Bus Company. It ran 26 bus companies in 26 different cities in 16 states. No bus company is going to mistreat its customers. It was the Democrat City Council in Montgomery that said blacks couldn't sit up front. Anything you want to find about that, they say, well, America, they wouldn't allow blacks to be, they had these black codes that they wouldn't allow them to be taught to read. No, America didn't do that, son. I had 8 great uncles that fought in the Civil. 6 of them were in the Andersonville prison where half the people starved to death. America was never in favor of that. There was 1.3% at the high water mark. There was 1.3% of the people in America that held slaves, and every last one of them was a Democrat. So don't you be lecturing us about your background. America we fought to kill slavery at the beginning. Just for kicks. This is a hot point for me. If you want to, like if you want to ask some of these folks about when was the slave trade ended, and people are talking about America, had all this slavery. Nobody. When was the slave trade ended? Ask them. Nobody can tell you because it's hidden in a place where nobody would ever see it. It's in the Constitution, and it says right in there that when they had the conflict between two things. 50% of the people lived in 10 states, 50% of the people lived in 3 states. Big aren't going to be dominated by little, and vice versa. How do you get around that? 4 states had slavery. Now, this is 1787. What happened in 1787? If you're from Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, or Ohio, you know what it was. You had the Northwest Territory, where you took land that they gave it to the Revolutionary soldiers because they didn't have any money. So they gave them land, but they said in there under no circumstances could you have slavery in the Northwest Territory, and it passed unanimously. Well, these guys are saying, I got to see what's coming here. That is, I'm going to have to go back and tell them that we're going to put in a new government, and they're also in the same day we're going to do away with slavery. So I'm not going to be able to sell that. So they came up with a compromise. And the compromise was that you couldn't import any more slaves after 20 years. 1787, 1797, 1807. So the slave trade to America was ended on January 1st, 1808, Act of Congress signed by President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. Now you've quarantined it. Now it's dead. Now it's just going to atrophy and it's going to be all gone. Until one of the most momentous elections in the history of mankind, 1828, defeated the most anti-slavery person in the history of mankind. Right this. Go see the movie Amistad, just for kicks. That the defense counsel for Amistad was John Quincy Adams, who dedicated his life to the destruction of slavery, hated slavery. He was defeated by the only genuine slave trader America ever elected, Andrew Jackson. And when he came in, they made a compromise that if you brought in a new state, free state, you brought in a new slave state, and ripped that thing apart that was just about dead. Now it's alive. And so now we have from 1830 until 1860 what's called the Jacksonian era, in which they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Until finally in 1857, the Supreme Court makes a ruling written by, I've never ever forgotten it. He deserves to be forgotten, but nevertheless. Roger Taney. Roger Taney was Attorney General for Andrew Jackson and campaign manager for Andrew Jackson, and he put him on the Supreme Court, who wrote the Dred Scott decision, which said this, that black people are chairs. And when you're in law school, you'll learn that chattel means property that you can buy and sell. And they said that black people are chattel, can be bought and sold like furniture. And the Whig Party, Daniel Webster and Henry Clay and those guys had been fighting against slavery all that time. The Whig Party got to the point, said, well, enough. We spent 30 years battling this. Now the Supreme Court has ruled, and we got to move on. We got to move on. The court has ruled. It sounds like John Kasich, and we just got to move on. And the Whig Party, in the matter of about 24 months, disappeared from the face of the earth. And a new party, the Republican Party, came up with the single purpose of ending slavery. And it came in and it did it, and we were well on our way to doing it. And the Democrats then said, well, you're not going to make us do something. We're individual states. And so, having been dedicated to slavery, they formed a group called the Ku Klux Klan, which was an effort to fight that idea. And they had 7 criteria to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Number 1, you cannot be a Republican. Number 2, you cannot have fought for the Union Army. And then it has the rest of them. If you go see Dinesh D'Souza's Hillary movie, you'll see some of it. Then what we found out was they wouldn't let blacks vote. And so we passed the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which didn't give blacks the right to vote. They'd always had the right to vote. They've been elected to things forever since the founding of the country. But it said to the Democrat states, read it, no state shall deny. In other words, you guys down there, quit it. And how many Democrats voted for that in the House and the Senate? 0. Same way with the 14th Amendment. Give them equal rights. You can't be charging them one price for another. The 14th Amendment, same way. Written by a congressman from Ohio. Not one single Democrat voted for it. And so the black mark on America is what the Democrat Party has done. And yet if you listen to them tonight and tomorrow night, They'll take every one of their sins and try to smack it on you and my country. But I repeat, I'm ambivalent on the topic. Thanks y'all. Bye-bye.
One more round of applause.